Thank you. Before we start our re-examination, or your examination, uh, I was told that there is a wish for you to summarize your evidence in an executive summary form. Now, your evidence has been filed, so anybody who cares to read the full report is there to be read.
Yes, sir.
But it would assist, I think, bless you, but it would assist, we think, if you summarize your report before we start again.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Consul Whitehall. Sure, I'm ready to do that. And with respect to just a quick segue as well to just to speak back to where we left prior to the lunch break or going on for our brief recess. That statistics, well, I produced a source. As I said previously, I looked at most of those primary sources related to Bermuda's agriculture during my dissertation research, and I was able to produce another document with regards to that, if that was a question you felt you needed to have answered. And I made sure that I uploaded that to the Dropbox. That is a minute from the Board of Agriculture, Bermuda's colonial government. It is dated April 1930, and it provides a statistical return dating back from 1914 all the way to 1929 for the island's agricultural industry as an aggregate. It does not provide for a breakdown of the parishes. However, it provides for a breakdown basically through the years, roughly by broad categories of produce, such as onions, such as potatoes, and then loose lilies as well, but also a plethora of other products that they loosely group as other vegetables. And speaking back to the point that I had made, there was a moment of decline, and you can track a bit of a decline from about 1921 onwards in terms of the production of things like potatoes and the so-called other vegetables categories, particularly from about 1922 onwards. There are some undulations like all types of statistics would be, and you could look at that closely if you wanted to engage that. And for your and the rest of the Commission's edification, that is found on the Dropbox, and it is noted TT0X, TT0X, Minutes of the Agriculture Board, April 1930. Also, with respect to your other questions about Bermuda's GDP or Bermuda's revenue and expenditure, as I mentioned previously, I dealt with that deal largely during my dissertation, so I did not have that on hand for the report. However, I produced the British Empire report, which gives statistical data as it relates to the revenues and expenditure of the island of Bermuda. You can find that also on the Dropbox, as it is noted, TT0X, British Empire Colonial Statistics, 1905 through 1919. The page for Bermuda's GDP is noted, page 17. So yes, speaking to those matters. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear in an attempt to make sure we helped you out with that response, Consul Whitehall, before we proceed any further.
That's helpful. And let me just ask, well, I'll come back to it after your summary, but I will ask whether or not there's a further disaggregation of the GDP into various industries. As you've indicated, there are the three main industries: naval work, agriculture, and tourism.
Tourism, yes, sir.
Is that disaggregated in the report?
In the British Empire Colonial Stats, the page that I noted was a page that addresses, let me just make sure, the page that I made a note of addresses bulk revenue and bulk expenditure for the colony, page 17. However, if you peruse through there, if you search Bermuda name, it does have some statistics, I'm sure, on some other matters. I could go back and look at that more closely if you need be at the particular time. But off the hand, the point that the page that I noted was the page with the kind of gross domestic product, or the colony-wide revenue and the colony-wide expenditure. That's what it's, yeah. Gross amount of public revenue, gross amount of public expenditure. And that's marked on from the years 1913, 1914, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Same deal for, well, slight variance with public expenditure. I don't think the years of public expenditure, no, the years of public expenditure do not match up the exact same as the years of public revenue, but that is how it's presented in that British Empire colonial statistics report that I uploaded.
All right, well, I thank you for that.
Not a problem. That being the case, thanks very much, Council Whitehall. Thanks very much, Justice Wade Miller. Thank you very much, members of the commission. In terms of giving an overview about this, my findings of my report, what I'd like to do is just pretty much just give an overview of the narrative and then proceed to make a few observations as we go across that, if you don't mind. If we can reference, I'll largely starting at about page 21 of the report and just scanning from there. Maybe not going page by page, but largely scanning from about beginning at page 21 of the report, if you wish to follow along. As I mentioned, these land acquisitions in the area of Takazan and the surrounding area. The surrounding area includes parts of Hamilton Parish as well as a little part of Smiths is also mentioned, are carried out largely by a company known as the Bermuda Development Company. The Bermuda Development Company worked and was formed in 1920, in the summer of 1920, July for the actual company itself, and then the company is empowered by an act to acquire land through compulsory purchase in August 1920. The Bermuda Development Company is largely a corporation that was formed from partners from Furnace Withy Steamship Company. Furnace Withy Steamship Company, which was a British-owned steamship company that had an American, I guess, subsidiary or American kind of branch of operations out of New York, as well as partnering with certain, we can use Council's term, members of Bermuda's aristocracy, or as I use the term, the oligarchy, who partnered with Furnace Withy and in order to create this corporation or this company known as the Bermuda Development Company in 1920. What you see with that is you see the influence of both local desires or local plans as well as an international agenda of Furnace Withy. And we can talk, or I'd like to designate that, or like to describe that, or I describe it in my report as a kind of international matrix of white power. So you have these wealthy or well-off white males from Britain, Bermuda, one operating, or at least a leader out of the States, Mr. Blackiston of Furnace Withy, and they coalesce around some shared ideas or shared economic plans to develop Bermuda for tourism in the interest of Furnace Withy's steamship business. The context which brings this to rise largely is some of the political context that we were discussing prior to the break, that we were going, myself and Council were discussing in terms of Bermuda's particular kind of aristocracy or oligarchical rule. That's what facilitates this. However, the broader context is really this post-war economic decisions. What is Bermuda going to do in the post-World War I moment? You do have this challenge or this, you have a situation that is set up whereby the war, of course, has disrupted trade. That's the major factor of the war. The war has disrupted trade, obviously because of people being in fear of battleships and being destroyed, et cetera, et cetera. So since sea transport is the major means of getting people as well as products back and forth in the world that exists right after World War I, we have Bermuda's leaders recognizing that they needed to reestablish some type of meaningful steamship contact with the rest of the world. They needed a regular steamship service, firstly to facilitate their agricultural industry as well as the context of tourism. So this is what we see. And by about the summer of, with the war ending in November 1918, and by about the summer of 1919, you see the new leader of the Bermuda Trade Development Board, Salisbury Stanley Sperling, or we could just usually call him S.S. Sperling, Salisbury Stanley Sperling. He teams up with Arthur Bluck, who was a Hamilton mayor, former Hamilton mayor, as well as the president of the Bank of Bermuda, as well as John P. Hand, another Hamilton businessman, and they all team up, Sperling, Bluck, and Hand, and they travel to New York City in order to negotiate directly with steamship companies in New York City in order to try and set up a new contract for the Bermuda government so that there can be steamship travel or regular steamship contact with Bermuda. By about August 1919, this works out because they meet up with Furnace Withy in New York City, the representatives of Furnace Withy. Furnace Withy's New York operation is run by a man by the name of Henry Curtis Blackiston. Henry Curtis Blackiston, he is the director of North American operations out of New York, and he engages with Sperling, Hand, and Bluck, and they kind of at least discuss some type of preliminary agreement, which the Bermuda Assembly agrees to by August of 1919. However, one of the things that we see in the background, of course, is what is this new transport contract or this new transport agreement? What is it going to prioritize? Is it going to prioritize agriculture? Is it going to prioritize tourism? And that was a decision that was a little bit up in the air. However, what we see from Sperling, Hand, and Bluck is we see discussions with the Furnace management as early as August 30th, and they're talking about the ways in which tourism is going to premiere highly in this process. I have a quote from Blackiston in August 1919, where he talks about Furnace Withy and Company. They don't own any hotels in the British West Indies. However, they have plans that some type of large-scale project can take place in Bermuda. And then he goes on to talk about investing between $4 and $5 million in the service to Bermuda. The Furnace service to Bermuda eventually gets known as the Furnace Bermuda Line, and they have a series of flagships which carry passengers, but also have large chill rooms to carry Bermuda's agricultural products back from the island to ports like New York and other ports. However, once again, we see at this early moment, we see discussions between these men outside of the spaces of formal governance to figure out what direction or what emphasis this steamship contracting business is going to have. In a letter to the governor, Sir Frederick Lewis, he is the owner, or we would use the terminology, the CEO of Furnace Withy at that time. Sir Frederick Lewis, he talks about saying that our business is a steamship one, pure and simple. It should never have been necessary for us to go beyond this. But the success of the steamship business depended upon the attractions of the island. So Furnace Withy, the owner of Furnace Withy, and that's actually footnote number 36, if we're wondering. That's footnote number 36 out of my report. But the owner of Furnace Withy, Sir Frederick Lewis, he has a broader vision to develop the ports where his vessels are going in order to create a kind of market for passenger transport to these spaces, in particular tourist traffic to these spaces. So in terms of how this is getting worked out, we see that the lean towards tourism is taking place in the context of these unofficial discussions that don't necessarily get tracked immediately in the Houses of Parliament, the House of Assembly, or these kind of formal institutions of governance. However, what Lewis says, Sir Frederick Lewis says, is before he's willing to commit millions of investment into Bermuda, he wants to see if Bermuda has the kind of charm that he believes would appeal to American tourists. So he lines up a visit to Bermuda in November 1919. He lines up a visit to Bermuda in November 1919 aboard his private vessel, the Moorish Prince. On the Moorish Prince are a number of executives. Henry Curtis Blackiston, who I mentioned earlier as the director of North American operations for Furnace Withy, he's on this trip. You have one of America's most famous golfers, a man by the name of Charles Blair McDonald. He is also on this vessel, as well as Charles D. Wetmore. He's a New York architect, and his firm, Warren and Wetmore, is a very influential firm. They've designed the New York Yacht Club, Grand Central Station terminals, and very important buildings in the city. So they're very well known and very prestigious. However, one of the reasons that Lewis invites Charles B. McDonald is Charles B. McDonald had visited Bermuda previously. And amongst he and his peers, they had discussed the idea of having a golf course in Bermuda because they believed Bermuda was picturesque and might appeal to American golfers, and they could make some type of investment out of that. So he had also spoken to Charles Wetmore, who was another one, Wetmore and Warren, the architect. He had spoken to Wetmore about this idea, so they had already kind of had some background conversations about this long before Furnace Withy is taking an interest in the island. However, they are able to make a good use, so to speak, of this opportunity to visit with Furnace Withy. When they arrive in Bermuda, once again, just highlighting the ways in which this is circumscribed by particular kinds of class interests as well, not just simply political, but also upper class Bermudians. They have a reception at the Princess Hotel. Governor Wilcox is there in attendance. Also, the Admiral, the Royal Naval Admiral, he is in attendance, Morgan Singer. Several members of the Trade Development Board, obviously because Sperling himself is the leader of the Trade Development Board. You also have a number of MCPs also there. The governor also has a tea for them on November 5th at Government House, hosts these individuals, and it's a lot of talk about them investing in Bermuda. It is a lot of this grand talk about them investing in Bermuda. And again, at these discussions, at these public meetings, or these public gatherings, quasi-public gatherings, Lewis is known to have made statements about having a golf course. He wants to have an 18-hole golf course in the island. He believes that if Bermuda had increased hotel accommodation, it would be more successful. And as I noted earlier, not just successful for Bermuda, but in reality, a type of linked success that was linked, of course, to the transportation of Furnace Withy vessels, a type of transportation that was linked to Furnace Withy vessels. So in the time that they're in Bermuda in November 1919, they are led around the island by some guides, Stanley Sperling, S.S. Sperling, as well as Francis Goodwin Goslin. Francis Goodwin Goslin is an interesting character, too, because he's been involved in tourism in Bermuda prior to this moment. He had an organization known as the Bermuda Tourist Association. The Bermuda Tourist Association, that gets formed around 1906, 1905, 1906. After that goes kind of bust. He's also an instrumental player in the coalescing of a trade development board. So he's been a background player and a leading figure, even though he's not up the front, he comes to foremost here. He's actually been interested in getting involved in tourism prior to that. And even before the formation of the Bermuda Tourist Association, he has relationships with a number of individuals, and he's instrumental with a number of the scientists who will come to Bermuda and form the Bermuda Biological Station prior to, I want to say that's 1903, 1904, at that kind of moment, leading up to the establishment of the Bermuda Biological Station. So Francis Goodwin Goslin, S.S. Sperling, they lead Lewis, Sir Frederick Lewis, Wetmore, McDonald, and this group around the island looking for suitable locations for not only a golf course, but also a hotel. They, of course, happen upon Takazan. And one of the reasons they happen upon Takazan, well, two reasons. One, Sperling is, of course, a member of colonial parliament for St. George's. So Sperling is familiar with the east end of the island. That's kind of the region of his constituency. As well as Gosling. Gosling also maintains a kind of hunting, fishing type of plot of land there in the Takazan area. It's known as the Clearing. For all reports, it's known to be a 100-acre estate. He bought that in 1907. So therefore, he leads them in this area. Of course, too, something else which has been noted, and I make a note of it in the report, is Takazan also has this very interesting rock formation along the beach known as the natural arches. And it had been a little point of curiosity, not necessarily a mainstream tourist attraction, but it had featured in some photographs prior to this moment. So folks had seen this kind of feature along the South Shore, the natural arches, these cave-shaped ridges. Bermuda's probably familiar with it, but nonetheless, he leads them to this area for those reasons. And of course, they say they're impressed with the area and they found this place to be very desirable, right? McDonald, I have a quote from McDonald's book. He proceeds to write a book about his reminiscences, and I believe his book is called Scotland's Gift, Golf, Reminiscences of Charles Blair McDonald. And he says that we found a desirable property at Takazan. And we were told, assumably by the individuals he was with, that they could get 500 acres for between $150,000 and $200,000. That's what he was told. This is, I'm making reference to footnote number 42. I'm making reference to footnote number 42 if we're just following along my storyline. So make a long story short, this